begin.
Hi and welcome everyone to this McGill School of Continuing Studies webinar. My name is Richard Nantel. I'm thrilled to be your moderator today for today's presentation titled Introduction to Dialogue Gap, How Dialogue Gap is Hurting Your Company. Before starting this presentation, a bit of housekeeping. Everyone will be receiving a copy of the slides, and you're also going to be receiving a copy of the recording for this session. You'll be receiving a link to that in an email. There will also be a question and answer period at the end of this session, so we invite you to ask questions using the GoToWebinar question box. To find the question box, look to the top right-hand corner of your screen. You'll see a column of icons. Click the red arrow to expand the control panel, and the question box is located at the bottom. Why don't we try this out right now to make sure that everything is working out. Please use the question box to let us know if you're able to see the screen and if you're able to hear the audio. And we've got a few people. Thank you. Great. Everything's working out very well. So thank you very much. All right. Our speaker today is Mr. Peter Nixon, McGill lecturer and author of both Dialogue Gap and Negotiation, Mastering Business in Asia. Peter Nixon has helped thousands of service professionals in more than 50 countries improve their sales, sourcing, and service to transform their careers and organizations. Originally from Montreal, Peter Nixon will lead this webinar from Hong Kong, where he has launched his consulting practice in 1994. Since that time, he has traveled extensively and worked with a variety of organizations, cultures, and executives. Peter has researched dialogue in dozens of cultures and assembled practical tools, methodologies, and workshops to enable and inspire. Simply put, Peter helps the right people discuss the right issues in the right way and at the right time and space. Peter, it's all yours.
Thank you, Richard, and good evening, everyone. I understand it's still before lunch for some of you, and it would be different times around the world for others. I recognize a few of the names, so thank you to those of you who know me, and I look forward to meeting the rest of you through the coming 60 minutes in this dialogue session. Dialogue Gap is a passionate subject for me, and I thank McGill for the opportunity to introduce the subject of my new book, How is Dialogue Gap Hurting Your Company? I will go through the slide deck, and I welcome your input at any time as we're going through. We also have a series of polling questions that we'll be asking the audience, so you're welcome to contribute as we proceed. So let me kick off. Dialogue Gap is, let me just advance the slide. Dialogue Gap is affecting you in terms of your customers, your suppliers, and your staff. And it may feel at times like there are real challenges. The reality is that there's a difference between what you're facing in terms of communication and the dialogue itself. So at no time in history have we felt we've been so connected as we are now, in fact, from Hong Kong to the rest of the world, but felt so isolated. So here I am alone in front of my screen in my office. Never have we communicated so much but spent so little time in dialogue, and I'll explain further how I differentiate those two. And never have we multitasked so well as a human race, but struggled to be totally present when we're with other people. The problems of most organizations can be traced directly to their inability to think and to talk together at these critical moments. So we'll make some references to the customer situations you're facing, the supplier situations that you're facing, and maybe some internal staff situations that you're facing as well. But dialogue is something that happens not just at work, but obviously at home as well as in society. So on your watch, in your own situations, you may find that you get to a point where the plan that you had suddenly has changed. The world's changed, the industry's changed, the technology's changed, so you can't reach your goal. This idea of the jewel, it rests beyond the wall of change. So you personally have to consider, how will you respond? It might be situations where you find your salespeople are not talking to customers. It might be situations where the service personnel are avoiding conflict with the customers. Or you might find that the sourcing departments are just not deriving the value out of the supply chain that you need to be achieving. So you may go up on this circle and start to blame others. You might be arrogant, say you're fine and it's all of their problem. You might be delusional, in fact, and say there is no problem. And as we've seen, many situations have led to destruction. So that route doesn't work. But if you can reflect to yourself and dialogue with the key stakeholders, perhaps negotiate some give and take with the parties involved, perhaps if there's an ongoing conflict, you'll mediate, then you'll eventually reach this, this jewel, however you want to define the goal of your dialogue. Now let me just advance the slide. Digital tipping point, a little concept I'd like to share with you, is whenever you are spending more than half of your time digitally rather than interpersonally connected. And obviously in the old days, as this picture points out, if there was a problem, we'd sit around in a circle and we'd talk about it. And as we became interconnected over the global internet, we moved into our cubicles. And now the slide on the right I just took this week on the subway here in Hong Kong with young people who are physically connected, but they've got the headphones in their ears and they're checking Facebook on their phones. And yet they're not talking with their neighbors, which is fine. It's a form of communication, very effective, but it's diminishing the amount of time that we have actually in dialogue. So to understand the difference, as I define it, communication is when we're exchanging information. I prefer to say, in fact, we're sending information, because we send emails, we send text, we do PowerPoints, we're having webinars. We're sending information all the time. You don't know, in fact, what goes in. You only know what goes out. This is different than dialogue. Dialogue, as I would define it, is when we sit and we collaborate, we think together to solve problems that we're facing. And so we're very good at communication, and we spend a lot of time communicating, but in fact this time is causing us less and less time together in dialogue. So there's a few examples on your screen of when we do communicate, and this is important, and then there's times when we need dialogue as well. Problem solving, innovation, coming up with better service, understanding user requirements before we go and procure, and getting real value for money out of the procurement process. All good examples of the importance of dialogue. Just advancing here to the next slide. So definition of dialogue gap. When we have a gap between the quality of dialogues that we are experiencing and the quality of dialogues that we need to be experiencing in order to solve the problems we face, not just at work but also at home and in society. And there's a lot of problems that you can think of at work possibly at home, and we see a lot of situations around us in the world today that require dialogue. You'll see our little Mind the Gap sign from the London Tube to remind us that there is a gap often, and we need to find ways to overcome that. Some of the symptoms that we find that are commonly indicating dialogue gap, a lot of surprise in organizations today because people are unaware of the issues before they explode in front of them. If in the old days, if people were all chatting over coffee or over lunch or around the water cooler, you'd know about issues before they became big. There's less of that happening now. As a result, there's more surprise and there's more anger. People are getting angry, saying, "Why didn't you tell me about this before it became an issue?" And the response might be, "Well, you didn't read your email." There's a lot of stress because there's more and more issues now to handle all at the same time. And it's very difficult. People are stressed because with less experience talking to each other about our emotions, we feel more stressed dealing with the emotions. A lot of my focus is making sure that the decision making is optimized. And we find that the decisions that are being taken in organizations today are not optimized because we're not including all the issues. We're not including all the stakeholders. The stakeholders bring the issues into the dialogue. And we're also missing methodologies that can help us incorporate divergent issues with a wide variety of stakeholders. There's also issues around isolation. People feel that their employees are feeling perhaps they lack opportunity to speak up. They feel unsupported, and they may feel that they're falling behind others. Other symptoms you'd see, missed deadlines, relationship issues, etc. So dialogue gap finds itself right in the middle of all of these situations at work. There could be branding issues. There might be strategic issues. There might be issues around innovation. You need dialogue to succeed in all of these bubbles. And if dialogue is not as effective as you need, then you're going to have problems. But think about also the problems that you're facing, not just at work, but also, well, here's some examples. We won't go through all of them, but let me talk to some of these. Some of you are on boards of directors. The Institute of Directors in the UK has found that 70% of UK senior executives are actually inhibited by each other. So you can imagine the effectiveness of the meetings if they're coming to the meetings feeling inhibited. Or on the US boards where people are feeling baffled, threatened, or annoyed with the diversity of the people that are on the boards. Of course, we're asking for diversity, but with diversity comes divergent views, and with divergent views comes conflict. And when that's facing a lack of dialogue skill and a lack of methodologies to handle the dialogue, there's obvious problems. In Canada, there's been some corporate governance movements to suggest that smartphones should be removed from the boardrooms because they actually lead to bad decision making because people are not 100% focused on what's being talked about. Here in Hong Kong, we've done some research with the Association of Project Managers where they have found full agreement. Project management dialogues today are much harder than ever before. Public service, do some interesting work in the public service. Silos and formality prevent real dialogue. So here's a nice quote right at the bottom of that slide. Good dialogues build confidence to have more good dialogues, but I've never seen any good dialogues in this organization. A live quote, but they preferred to allow that organization to remain nameless. I'd like you to understand a little bit more in terms of this topic by considering it also in other contexts. So let me just advance the slide from a work situation to dialogue gap at home. So some of you might have teenagers, as I do. Teenagers traditionally are difficult to talk to, as we were when we were that age, but now teenagers are glued to Facebooks and laptops and cell phones and communicate with their friends all the time, and you find it very difficult, perhaps as parents, to talk to them. I do a lot of work with this age group, and you know, they're surfacing, they're telling us the problems that they're facing. They're very stressed. They find it very difficult to handle the work pressures at school and keeping everything else going all at the same time. You've got all of the bullying things that are happening online are also real issues of importance. Family meals, where we used to all sit around and chat as families, are happening less and less often. Marriages obviously are struggling because of the amount of time. So you find couples are emailing each other because they have to communicate, but they have less and less time actually in dialogue. PC games are interesting. I'll show you some interesting results on the next slide in terms of PC games. Here in Hong Kong, point number 2, Asian kids have twice the amount of gadgets, digital gadgets, as they do in the rest of the world. So that's 4 gadgets per Hong Kong child. So you think, what are those gadgets? You'd have a cell phone. You'd have perhaps a camera, digital camera. You might have a tablet. And you probably have a game of some sort, which is fine. So everyone's connected, and it's less expensive to buy those in Asia than perhaps in other parts of the world. But look how many hours, average number of hours used per day, 20 hours. You think, well, when are we sleeping? It's a real issue that they're facing here in Asia, but also facing this issue around other parts of the world. In the U.S., they've done some interesting research and found that the heaviest users of digital gadgets have, in fact, the lowest grades in school. No surprise, and there's some contributing reasons there, but below C. And item 6, PC games. Here in China, they found that there's 33 million addicts. I've been told that there's 350 million users. So people selling PC games making lots of money. But the government's really concerned with the addicts, and they have been quoted as saying that they're using electroshock therapy, surgery, and chemicals to try to deal with this problem. So some people tell me, if I'm going to be given anything, please give me the chemicals. Moving on to consider dialogue gap in society. Just a few comments on that. Dialogue gap finds itself right in the middle of issues in education. We saw the whole thing that popped up in the Arab Spring, and in fact I'm on my way back to Arabia, to the Gulf on Monday. The Occupy Wall Street movement and how that spread around the world. Obviously very relevant, people not feeling that they're heard from. But you think about issues in terms of religion, whistleblowers, the whole fundamentalism, and healthcare. Let me give you some examples in terms of specific dialogue gap issues that are found in society. Okay. You might have read, you might be personally experienced some of the whistleblower situations that we faced in China, like the doctor that said there's a tainted milk problem and all the babies were dying, you know, thrown in jail for inciting social disorder. All of what we watched in the Middle East. But politics in the U.S. with the election right now, and how bonds were downgraded in terms of this, quote, dysfunctional virus because of the bad dialogue process that was happening in terms of the U.S. budget. Vatican, considering that they're wondering why people are so angry and why they're so disturbed about what's been going on in terms of their issues, and it's not restricted only to Catholicism and pedophilia. Healthcare, here in Hong Kong, the hospital authority has to restrict the amount of time physicians spend with patients to 5 minutes because there's not enough physicians for all the patients. And in 5 minutes, you can't really understand what's the underlying situation. You need to extend it to 30, 40, 50 minutes. Some interesting research out of the U.S. where doctors that can sit down and talk a full 45 to 60 minutes with their patients not only understand the problems, but they understand the underlying causes of those problems, and then they can make a proper diagnosis and recommendation. So dialogue gap and the amount of time that we're spending and the amount of experience and skill that we're bringing to those face-to-face encounters has implications at work, implications at home, also implications in society. I'd like to invite you now, you've been patiently listening to my definition and introduction to dialogue gap. Let's ask you, in terms of our first polling question, do you experience more problems from dialogue gap arising at work, at home, or in society? So just take a moment, check one of those. Okay, results are in, and we're getting most of the results are showing up at work. So 65% showing up problems at work, but also people recognizing the social issues as well as home issues. So we'll focus most of our remarks about work, and most of the details and examples I give in the book are work, but let's recognize that these are issues at home as well as in society. We're paid to solve these at work, and that's what we'll focus on. So the number one question that we're all asking today is, how can we better manage our dialogues to get these best outcomes? Well, what sort of outcomes are we actually after? First of all, in the middle of this puzzle, I focus on what I call the optimal outcome. And the optimal outcome was best defined by Dr. Nash, who won the Nobel Prize for proving that there is an optimal outcome. There's an economic best outcome, and he's the one that you would know from the Beautiful Mind video, and he's the one that suggested that Adam Smith was almost correct when he said that what's best for the market is what's best for you. John Nash suggested, actually what's best for the market is what's best for you and the other side. In his Princeton thesis, he does suggest that dialogues needed to figure out what that best outcome is. And what I offer today is that in order to get these optimal outcomes, however you might want to define that, maximize the profit for your organization, maximize revenues, maximize market coverage, whatever it might be, what we're after here is you can't only look at yourself, you have to also look at the other side. So it involves all the stakeholders. I've simplified it to us and them in this picture, but in fact, obviously, it's more than just us and them. There's a recognition that there's a lot of stakeholders involved. And I just want to go through these pieces of the pie as we move through. The next slide will give you some indication as to the first piece of the puzzle, which is the stakeholders. There's a lot of stakeholders in each of your situations. You'll think about the customers, the suppliers, the shareholders, perhaps regulators. Think also about the unrepresented parties that are in the dialogue. They're affected by the dialogue, but they may not be at the table. For example, market expansion for your companies will impact on the employees in any particular jurisdiction, but they're seldom represented in the conversation. And it's important to recognize who all the key stakeholders are, and then you don't have to bring them to the table, but you need to bring their input into the dialogue. So you could poll them, for example, survey them, and then bring their remarks into the conversation by one of the VPs, or for example, who might be representing them. So first step, in order to get the best outcome, recognize who all the stakeholders are. Second step, when you're focusing on getting the best outcome, you have to identify all the issues. Now there's normally 50 or 60 issues, but because we're busy and because we're focused and because our experience is somewhat limited, we focus primarily on price, which is normal. Quality is number 2 that comes up. The timing issues in terms of meeting deadlines, etc. scope of work, whatever that work might be, the personnel involved, and the legal issues always come up. But below those are many sub-issues. So if you just take price, for example, there's lots of sub-issues. So we're going to be covering when you get paid, how you get paid, how much you get paid, where they pay you. All those sorts of issues are in that category. So 5 or 6 categories, but lots of sub-issues in each of those. So how do we get the best outcome? There's many ways we can go about that. I touch on many different examples in the book. You can negotiate, you can influence, you can force them to do it, you can try to persuade them. We'll focus here a little bit more on the details of dialogue. There's 2 other issues of importance in terms of the puzzle. The next one is time. So you need to figure out what's the right time in order to carry out the dialogue. If you do it too early, they don't care. If you're too late, it doesn't matter. If you don't give people enough time, they feel like they're not given the opportunity to speak. And if you take too long, they get bored. So there's a number of issues. It's also important, as we move to the next slide on space, to consider each of these pieces of the puzzle in terms of cultural differences. So when you speak, when you hold the dialogue, and what space you hold the dialogue in would be very different if you're in New York or Montreal or London or Hong Kong or Tokyo or in Brazil. So culture has a lot to play in each of these pieces. But as you lead your dialogues, think about each of the pieces of the puzzle. When we talk about space, we're not talking only about physical space, but also the space in your agenda. Do you have space in your agenda not just for briefing, communication, but can you actually have a dialogue on an issue where you're just trying to surface all the key points? And do people feel trusted? If they open up, will they actually be listened to, or will they have their legs cut off from underneath them when they tell their feelings? So I'd like to ask a second poll question, get your input. We've looked at 5 pieces of the puzzles. Which piece of the puzzle do you find the most challenging? Is it involving all the stakeholders? Is it surfacing all the issues? Is it leading the dialogue in the right way, or managing the time, or creating a space conducive to the dialogue? What do you guys think? Let's do a poll. Ask all the attendees to give their input and find out where the issues are. So poll is in progress. The one that's coming up the most at the moment is what's the right way to go about it. The second most important one is getting all the issues on the table. Normally the issues are a problem, because if you don't involve all the stakeholders, you won't know the issues, and increasingly finding the way to do it is a big challenge. And that's why we're here today, to talk about that. So let's move to the next slide, which gives you some more detail in terms of how might we do that more effectively. What's the right way to actually go about this? We've studied people who are good at dialogue, so let's give you some of those pointers right away. It's 5 specific attributes. People who are good at dialogue are good at presence. They're good at respecting each other, expressing, suspending, and absorbing. The first of these is presence. And when we talk about presence, we're talking about being totally focused, 100% focused on the dialogue and the people involved. And you think about athletes in flow, they're at the peak of their game. I think we've lost our ability to be totally present because we're so good now at multitasking. And perhaps we're trying to do a little bit too much at once. You can't always be totally present, but it's important to be present in dialogue. So when you're in dialogue, it's important to be present. And I'd like to ask you another polling question. We've looked at 3 specific behaviors of people who are good at presence. Let's ask the question now, which of these 3 do you find most challenging? Is it controlling your emotions, to enhance your situation rather than hinder it, or is it multitasking, or is it recognizing and listening to your intuition and that of others? Interesting question here to ask the audience, because I don't know what you'll say, but I do know that they're all important issues. And sure enough, coming up is one that's been coming up big since the start of this recession back in 2008, is managing your emotions in the dialogue. Because we know if you lose the emotional control, that you'll probably get upset and stop talking, or they'll get upset and stop talking. So you can move from effective dialogue into this, what we call silence and violence, quite easily. And obviously we like to de-escalate the situation as much as possible. So that's become a very important aspect of solutions that we're rolling out, you know, how to manage those emotions more effectively. Let's look now at the next of these. Respect, very important to respect. You see some pictures of Aung San Suu Kyi, who's a wonderful leader in Burma, in Myanmar. So she was put in under house arrest for most of the last 20 years, and yet never lost respect for her captives. The leaders, the military who put her under house arrest, I find that generally we're losing respect for each other, and I think that's largely because the media is reporting so much corruption. You know, not everyone's corrupt, but when all you see in the news is that our leaders are corrupt, or that they're focused entirely on materialistic gain, it's causing a fair amount of disrespect to come up. So let's ask the question in terms of dialogue and respect. We have a poll here that's asking you to identify which of these three behaviors in terms of good respect is most challenging for you. Inclusive of others, regardless of the diversity, being diplomatic, or being sincere, honest, and dialoguing with proper motives. Let's see what comes up most often as the challenge here for you. So middle vote here, be diplomatic and don't criticize or use judgmental labels. La diplomatie, voilà. Very difficult, isn't it, when we are in dialogue to not be judgmental and not to criticize. And that, although, you know, that all comes from us, and if we're not managing how we respond, what we're actually causing is for the other party to shut down. So this one's quite related to the next one when we look at expression. So the next slide looks at the next element of good dialogists, if you wish, is their ability to express themselves, either through voice or through writing or through creative arts. And I think we've lost, actually, our ability to express ourselves well because we are you know, communicating digitally so much of the time now, email, etc. So the next poll is asking the question, in terms of expression, where do you find your major challenge? Is it speaking your mind and sharing your feelings without getting upset? Is it inquiring appreciatively of others by asking engaging questions without causing them to feel bad? Or is it wanting to wait until you know everything before you say anything? Those are three common problems. So which of these three challenges do you find mostly your challenge? And here you go. Very quickly, the results are showing we don't want to wait until we know it all to get it right before we speak up. It's normal in organizations, especially because we're so focused on communication. We want to have the right answer. We don't want to be judged for having the wrong answer, so instead we give no answer. The results are evening out now. Inquiring of others by asking engaging questions, coming in a close second, and a close third, speaking your mind and sharing your feelings without venting rage. So all very important. Basically, we're saying that all of these behaviors are very important. Now, we also know from our research why people don't speak has a lot to do with how people don't listen. And so if you're getting upset, as you said in the respect response, venting rage, people, assuming you're the boss in the office, people aren't going to speak up if they see how you react. And you might blame them for not expressing themselves, but in fact they're not expressing themselves because of how they saw your last reaction. The next slide shows 3 interesting pictures. This gentleman is the same person. This man boarded the plane from Hong Kong to Vancouver as the old man and got off the plane in Vancouver as the young man on the right-hand side. And it's a reminder that if you want to be good at dialogue, you have to suspend your judgments and your beliefs in order to understand where are they coming from. If you want, you can read Daniel Goleman's book. He touches on it. But let's look at 3 of the underlying behaviors in terms of suspending your beliefs, judgments, and maybe your ego or attachments. I think we hang on to those because of our conservatism. We like to think about what's happened in the past as being the way we'd like it to be in the future. Where do you see your challenges in terms of suspending? Is it that you're challenged to feel equal in mind and not under obligation to others? Is it avoiding those either-or choices? You know, you're either with us or you're against us. Or is it finding compassion for others and recognizing that everything is actually interconnected? We're all in this together. Which of these 3 do you see as your greatest challenge? Another interesting poll. Love these webinars to see what people can think you're giving your input. As the results are coming in, we're seeing a pretty even tie closely between the first 2. Being equal in mind and not under obligation to others. So this whole idea that we're not equal, but we can be egalitarian is important. And avoiding these black and white choices, very important. And there I can say there's big cultural issues, East versus West, which influence all of these outcomes. The last of the 5 attributes for people who are good at dialogue is absorbing. And absorbing is not just listening, it's also being able to read body language and to understand your gut feelings, where people are coming from. And I think we've lost this because we spend less and less time actually together, face-to-face. In fact, we're not face-to-face in the webinar, so here's a situation where we might have in the past had face-to-face training or meetings, and now we're having a webinar. So this is evolving as we move into the new technologies, but I think at the moment we're losing this ability to absorb the messages. Nice picture of a panda bear. They know how their babies feel, and they don't even talk to each other, but they pick up the messages very well. So we've got 3 attributes of people who are good at absorbing, and the next slide polling question will be asking these 3 questions. Which do you find most challenges? Is it reading body language? Is it mirroring what others have to say and asking a related question? Or is it recognizing feedback is actually a gift, even if it's given to you in a very unkind wrapping? Which of these 3 do you find most challenging? Another very interesting poll question. Let's see, where's the response here? Also very culturally specific. North America, easy to give feedback, not always nicely wrapped. North Asia and South Asia, you don't get as much feedback without really digging for it. But remember, the body language never stops talking. So, in fact, they'll always be telling you. You just have to make sure that you're looking for the response. So, sure enough, number 1, recognizing feedback as a gift, regardless of how it's wrapped. I like to say it's better that they tell you, then you can deal with it. If they don't tell you, you don't know how to deal with it. So those are 5 attributes of people who are very good at dialogue. We've looked at them in some detail. You might still have this issue if we wish a dialogue related to negotiation. Common problem I'm often asked is, I'm not getting the most for myself. What can I do? I'd like to offer a possible solution. On the next slide, you'll see a methodology, just one of the 50 that we're offering in this book, a methodology called challenge mapping. So you take the problem, whatever your problem is. In this case, I'll use the problem, I'm not getting the most I can from my negotiations. And you turn the problem into a positive. And the positive is, how might we, or how might I, get optimal outcomes from my negotiations? And when you turn the problem into a positive, you can then start your map. And here's what the map looks like. And you can use these maps whenever you want. First, on the next slide, you'll see you can take the question and you first of all identify, why do we want to get the most, why do we want to get optimal outcomes from our negotiations? Whatever your reasons are. They're all good reasons. So you would ask all the stakeholders involved in this particular problem, why do you want to get this outcome? And they'll give you many, many answers. They're all good answers. Just get all the answers out on the table. Then ask them, what's stopping us from getting optimal outcomes from our negotiations? And they'll give you lots of answers there too. Once you have all of the input, all the reasons why and all the reasons stopping you, then you can put them up on the map. And here's a slide that just shows you how you might map those. All the reasons why would go up on the map. All the reasons stopping you would go down on the map. And from that point, it gives you a full picture of the issues. Then you can prioritize the issues. And often when I do these with groups, they say, wow, this is the first time all the issues on this topic have been clear and transparent, and we've had a chance to talk to them and prioritize them. It's an 8-step process. If you're interested, there's a little bit more. You can follow the link to the ambassador, Canadian expert in problem solving, creative problem solving, but a very good technique, which I describe also in my book. That's just one of many details. There's many more. I just want to share one more before we move into questions. On the next slide, you'll see a reference to, again, to the puzzle. See on the bottom right-hand corner of the puzzle, we talk about speak their dialect. Just a little bit on dialect as it relates to dialogue. This concept comes to us from Erich Fromm, who was the original scientist, wrote the book The Art of Loving and several other interesting books. And building on Erich Fromm's work was Dr. Elias Porter from Personal Strengths, and he's now passed away, but he left behind a fantastic little assessment which identifies your motivational dialect. So let me move to the next slide, and I'll make reference to these. So there's basically, we're all driven by a combination of these motivations, but there's one that pushes us more than the others. Some of us are really driven by results. So when you listen to what people say and how they say it, you can start to identify if they're primarily results-oriented, or as the next slide would show, relationship-oriented, or more rationale-oriented. I won't go through these details, but I think you clearly understand the differences. You've got some who really drive for results. They like to talk about the big picture. They want to get straight to the point. What's in it for me? Those are the types of things. So when you're talking to those people, you want to speak that dialect. That's what we're after. If you're speaking to people more interested in relationships, you hear about the discussion of the human angle. Who do you know? Who's involved? How will it affect the team? That's what you want to talk about, and that's how you want to talk about it. Much more feeling, much more warmth. It's a very different dialect, if you wish. Here in China, there's over 1,000 dialects. And I always say, if you know the red, green, and blue dialect, you can talk to anybody successfully, because these underline human motivations are what really drives behavior. The third style, more of a green motivation, are the people who are interested in the details. They want to know exactly the analysis, the pros and cons, and so they would like you to talk to the process steps, the advantages, disadvantages. They're not asking for the emotional response, they want the rational response. So if you recognize that's the style of the person that you're dealing with, then you want to respond in that way. That's the dialect that you would bring to the table. Quite different than the others. Now, we talked earlier about how things change as you get upset. So here's an interesting slide just to remind us that we do change as we move into higher stages of conflict or stress. And we also are able to identify on this next slide how you change. The same instrument helps us identify how you change. For example, here's a negotiation team. Stage 0, when things are going well, people have a primary motivation. But as people get more upset, they change color. Well, we can predict how you're going to change, and we can identify from that how you will do in terms of your own dialogues and negotiations as we turn up the pressure. That gives us a way to turn down the pressure, to de-escalate conflict, and bring people back to achieving the optimal outcomes. So there's a variety of pictures there, different types of people, different types of styles. But once you understand the styles and you can understand how people change, you learn more about yourself. It teaches you a way of helping to help other people as well. I wanted to leave time at the end to invite you to comment. Richard has given you a chance to send in questions. So here's my question to you. What's stopping you from being a dialogue leader?
Great. This is excellent, Peter. While people are adding any questions they may have to the question box, a couple of quick questions that I can think of immediately is if people are communicating more and yet engaging in dialogue less, how do you break that? How do you get people to talk to each other?
Oh, great question, Richard. So communicating more and dialoguing less, and how do you break the cycle? Well, that's exactly where we are in the world right now. And I think it's the number one thing that we need to do more of is to create this space for dialogue. So for example, as we're doing right now, we've had about 45 minutes of communication. Now we stop and we open it up to dialogue. And I like the picture of the box. So you open the box or you open the door by asking a question, and then just wait and see what people say. So here's my question. Well, what's stopping you from being a dialogue leader? So at work and in meetings, create time in your agenda and then invite the question. Ask the question. How can we make this company more effective? How can we run these things more efficiently? And see what they say.
Excellent. We've got some questions that are coming in now, Peter. Somebody has mentioned that formality may be a big barrier. How formal should these dialogue sessions be? Should they be scheduled meetings? Is it better for these things to take place sort of off the cuff and in ways that are less structured?
Oh, great question. And again, culturally specific, right? So in different cultures, people are more or less comfortable to speak. I've done dialogue. I've solved problems at 2 o'clock in the morning in hostess lounges that are very gender biased because that's what worked in that situation. And I've done power breakfasts and I've done boardrooms. So what you should be aiming to do is to find a time and a space that works effectively in your situation. You know, in some cultures, people don't want to speak up in front of the crowd, but they'll be very comfortable to go one-on-one. So creating the one-on-one chance to have that conversation is very important. Some companies are using skip-level meetings where not your boss, but your boss's boss comes and asks you a question. Now, you might think that's very comfortable and you might be willing to talk, but a lot of people don't like to talk to their boss's boss because they think the only outcome is going to be negative. So it's important to have a variety of these methodologies that you can use that are appropriate in the cultural context and also the context in which your direct reports, your suppliers, your customers feel comfortable to talk. So you have an extra antenna open for, is it a trusting space? We used to call it place, and we realized that was a problem because of a few situations where we found the boss welcomed dialogue and the people stopped talking. And in one particular case, after these dialogue sessions, the boss would call the employees into his office one at a time and ask the question, why did you raise that issue in the meeting? Well, the message that the staff got was, the boss is not happy, I'll stop raising the issues in the meeting. So we had to put an end to that. Again, it's usually the speaker that creates the space. So if you're in a situation, be flexible. Whatever, if it's not working, be flexible, find another spot. In the office, out of the office, coffee shops have become the most valuable places now around the world for having performance appraisal meetings and sales meetings. That they've just happened on a real opportunity here to sell coffee and create a meeting space for companies that find they needed flexible spaces.
Excellent. Peter, it's been estimated that about 30% of all employees work remotely now. How can organizations that have a dispersed workforce, what can they do to enable a greater sense of dialogue if people are working from home offices, working on the road, and so on?
Oh, excellent. And it's a reality of today, so we need to deal with it. I think we're also in a sweet spot where in the future people will go back and they'll say, wow, how did you manage to dialogue without seeing each other? So I think that what's coming and what I see coming is video Skype, Cisco's telepresence, webinars that have audio that works for everybody with video that works for everybody. That's just around the corner. And once that's easily available, we're already seeing it, for example, on some of the 3G and 4G phones where people are just having video conversations, but they're doing them digitally and they're not face-to-face. So as long as you can see the person, it's great. It's not as good as being physically together, but it's much better than being on email or text.
Okay. If we aren't video enabled, how do you go about reading body language and the person's mood and so on, using strictly audio as we are right now?
Well, that's obviously needs a bit of training. So what we recommend that people do is that they express their feelings verbally, so that the listener can hear what their feelings are. But that requires a little bit of training. If you find that people are not expressing their feelings, then again, as the speaker or the questioner, you can ask them. So I'll give you an example. I could say, for example, Richard, you're very comfortable in this medium. How do you feel this conversation's going at the moment?
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, I see. So there's no shame in actually asking people how they feel in terms of the quality of the dialogue.
No, it's also important to know that if you persist at least 3 times with your question, you will eventually get an answer. Most people will answer within three times. They might feel reluctant to answer the first time, but if you ask again, they'll typically respond. And if you ask a 3rd time, they'll just answer because they want you to stop asking.
Excellent. Okay. Peter, is there a hierarchy in terms of ways to have conversations or dialogues, and I'm thinking, clearly face-to-face with people would be at the top of the hierarchy, and then, potentially video-enabled sessions might be next, and then perhaps telephone and so on. In terms of adopting technologies for these type of things, is there a strict hierarchy that we should be following in terms of which might produce the best results in dialogue?
Well, I think if you put face-to-face first with a facilitator, that would be number one. And face-to-face, not professionally facilitated, or leaders, dialogue leaders are untrained, that would be second. And then video, and then audio, and then below, if you drew a line there, I think those are all dialogue. Below that line, I don't think it's dialogue, I think it's communication. So then we've got, email, texting, instant messaging. But I think that clearly there's a difference between the dialogue that's happening when people can see and hear each other and the communication that we typically deal with all the time now.
Okay. Another question from one of our attendees today, which is, with the lack of dialogue competencies, how do you have a sense about what the growth market is in the mediator and psychotherapy business? It seems that we as a society will need to increase the number of guidance counselors in schools to help train students in dialogue skills.
Well, I absolutely agree. I think also if you look at the executive coaching market and the parenting skills market, these are markets that never existed. So what's caused them to come out of nowhere is I think this growing dialogue gap. And certainly my experience in schools, the guidance counselors are busy, and they're facing problems that they've never had to face before. So we're trying to move dialogue training into schools. We're trying to teach teachers how to create dialogue space. The teachers love the idea, and the response we're getting is the curriculum's too full, we have no time to dialogue. Students are telling us we arrive at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning and there's no dialogue until we leave, because we're downloading information from the start of the day to the end of the day.
Excellent. There's a number of questions here from readers that all suggest that maybe organizations should have people in formal roles to enable dialogue, sort of a chief dialogue officer. Do you think there's benefit to something along those lines?
Well, I think we need a systematic approach to improving this, so I think we all need to get better at it. But one of the recommendations I do make in my book is that we should perhaps not have a chief dialogue officer, but have a dialogue referee, if you wish, or just appoint somebody in the meeting who will keep track of how effective our dialogue is and just remind us. I think it's quite important that we do that. I think also if you have a way of rewarding people for surfacing these new insights in meetings, if it's recognized and people voice out and say, that's a great idea, I wouldn't have come up with that if we hadn't have had this conversation, then it reinforces the importance.
Excellent. Peter, thank you very much. We're out of time. This was a fascinating discussion, and I think we've all learned a lot about dialogue and the importance of more dialogue in our lives. If you're interested in learning more about dialogue gap and business development, you're invited to register for Peter's live workshop at McGill School of Continuing Studies on April 26th. He'll be in Montreal for this one-day session. This concludes today's presentation. Peter, thank you very, very much. We would ask that everyone, when leaving this presentation, thank you. We invite you to fill out the feedback survey, which appears in the pop-up window as you're leaving. Your comments and feedback will be greatly appreciated. We invite you to visit the McGill School of Continuing Studies website and check our list of upcoming webinars and workshops. Once again, thank you very much. Have a great day. You will be receiving a copy of the slides and a link to view the recording. Thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.